Very good morning, friends. In today's period, we have to study the first topic of the business finance paper second. That topic is entitled as corporate restructuring. What is the title of that topic? Corporate restructuring. Now, we have to understand the exact meaning of corporate restructuring. What is the exact meaning of corporate restructuring? Financial crisis is the main reason for restructuring of the company. Okay? When any company suffers heavy losses consistently or having critical financial position may require restructure of its capital structure. Okay? Many times the companies having bad financial position, try to understand. Many times the company having bad financial position and suffering heavy losses may lead to dissolution or liquidation. Okay? However, company or corporate restructuring is the best alternative for liquidation as well as dissolution. It is mainly depending upon the assumption of the company. It has the bright future and they can earn sufficient profit in the near future. Okay? If the company has potential to maximize the profit in the near future, then and then only corporate restructuring is advisable. Try to understand. When it is advisable, when company has the potential to maximize the profit in near future, then and then only the corporate restructuring is advisable. If there is a no hope for making sufficient profit in future, try to understand. There is a no hope for making sufficient profit in future. In such a case, winding up company is better than restructuring. Try to understand. If there is a no hope in future for earning the sufficient profit, at that time restructuring is not profitable. What is profitable? Winding up is profitable. Winding up is essential. That's why we have to understand. Try to understand. Financial crisis. Financial crisis leads to restructuring of a company. Corporate restructuring become necessary under consistent loss or bad financial position of a company. Okay? Of course, corporate restructuring is preferred to alternative against dissolution or liquidation of the company. It means that instead of dissolution or liquidation, corporate restructuring is used. Okay? And that is the best alternative for it. Okay? The basic assumption of restructuring is that the company has the potentiality of making sufficient profit in future. Try to understand. Again, I am going to repeat it. The basic assumption is that the company has the potentiality of making sufficient profit in future. Potentiality of profit makes restructure meaningful. Okay. The term sufficient profits means profits which will be enough not only to pay dividends to the shareholders but also for plugging back the surplus funds. It means that the object of the restructuring is to explore the potentialities against to rise to the expected level of profit. Otherwise, it is better to wind up the company. Under globalization and privatization, try to understand. Under the situation of globalization and privatization, corporate restructuring has a broader meaning. Any change in the business capacity or change in capital structure or change in ownership is termed as restructuring. Try to understand. These three things are also important. What are those three things? Any change in business capacity or change in capital structure or change in ownership is termed as restructuring. Of course, the change is forced by internal factors. Try to understand. Change is forced by internal factors or external environment or both, such as consistent losses. Okay? Outdated production technology, increased competition in market, emergence of new markets, business cycles, advanced technologies, demographic changes, etc. Due to these reasons, you have to make change in your organization. Sometimes a company wants to enhance its leadership position in the market. That is also another reason. What is it? Company wants to enhance its leadership position in the market. Under all these situations, a company proposes restructuring, which is essential for survival. It means that why it is essential? Because there is a there is a hope there is a hope for earning the more profit in future. At that time, restructuring is essential. And for what purpose? Essential for survival. Okay. Now we have to understand the meaning of corporate restructuring. What is the exact meaning of corporate restructuring? Corporate restructuring means any change in business capacity. Already I told you, any change in the business capacity or portfolio by an organic route, or change in the capital structure, or change in the ownership or management of the company. That is the meaning of corporate restructuring. It's the meaning of corporate restructuring. Try to understand, there are such type of changes when made. At that time you can identify that a company is restructured company. Try to understand. Okay, that's why we have to understand the meaning of corporate restructuring. Now we have to consider here, we have to study here the different types of the features of restructuring. What are the features of restructuring? Those features also we have to study. Different types of the features I have mentioned here. First feature is there, corporate restructuring is a change under extraordinary course. What is the feature? Extraordinary course. It means that change under extraordinary course. That is the first feature. It means that corporate restructuring is nothing but a change under extraordinary course. Then second feature we have to study, it is forced by internal factors. It is forced by internal factors or external environment or both. Try to understand. It is forced by internal factors or external environment or both. This is also another feature. Then next feature also we have to study, it may be change in the business capacity. It may be change in the business capacity or portfolio by an organic route. Try to understand. It may be change in the business capacity. Such type of changes can be in the capacity of the business or portfolio by an inorganic route. Then next feature of the restructuring we have to study, it may be change in the capital structure or change in ownership or control over management. Try to understand what type of changes are possible in restructuring. Change in capital structure, change in ownership, or change in control over management. Okay. In this way, this feature also we have to study. It means that already I told you there is a possibility of three types of changes. Changes in capital structure, changes in ownership, or changes in control of the control over the management. Okay, these types of the changes are also possible, and this is also the feature of restructuring. Next feature we have to understand, it may be internal or external restructuring. Try to understand. It may be internal restructuring or external restructuring. If internal restructuring is there, there will be no change at all more in the structure. But if external restructuring is there, definitely you will find drastic change will be there. Then next feature is also there. It requires pre-sanctions of shareholders and creditors of the company. If you would like to restructure your company, at that time you have to take pre-sanction. You have to get pre-sanction of the shareholders, because shareholders are real owner of the company. Don't forget. That's why you cannot omit, you cannot neglect the opinions of the shareholders. Okay. That's why you have to require, you have to take the pre-sanction of the shareholders for the restructuring, and also you have to take pre-sanction of the creditors of the company. And this is also the feature of the restructuring. Then next feature we have to study, that is the object of the restructuring is to explore the potentiality or to enhance market position. The object of restructuring is to explore the potentiality. It means that whatever maybe potential is there in the organization, it should be explored in full capacity. And for that purpose also, and another purpose is also we have to understand to enhance market position. And for the both these purposes or for the both these objectives, restructuring is there. Okay. And the last feature we have to discuss here, it may require pre-sanctions from SEBI, okay, Security Exchange Board of India, or the court, or from the both in certain forms of restructuring. Okay, as per the requirement you have to take pre-sanction of SEBI or court, or both from the court and SEBI also. In this way, these are the different features of restructuring. Okay, then we have to understand there are different types of the forms of corporate restructuring. What are the forms of corporate restructuring? Those forms also we have to understand. There are different types of the forms are there. Okay, corporate restructuring may be in different forms, which are generally classified as mentioned in the chart. First, internal forms, and second, external forms. These are different two forms of corporate restructuring. Now we have to study these two forms in detail also. Now come to the point, what are the internal forms? Internal forms are also there. Different types of the forms we can discuss here. First, alteration of share capital. Try to understand. The Companies Act 1956, try to understand. The Companies Act 1956 has provided for alteration of share capital under section 94 to 97. It includes increase of share capital by issue of new shares, consolidation of shares into larger denominations, subdivisions of the shares into smaller denominations, conversion of fully paid shares into stock or vice versa, and cancellation of unissued shares. What type of shares? Unissued shares also you can cancel. These forms of restructuring are simpler as they all required ordinary resolution generally. Such type of restructuring is required only ordinary resolution. That is called alteration of share capital. This is the first internal form of the restructuring. What is it? Alteration of share capital. Now second form we have to study here. What is it? Reduction of share capital. Try to understand. Very simple form is there. Reduction. You can reduce your share capital also. A company may reduce its share capital under corporate restructuring. The section 100 to 105 of the Companies Act permit for reduction of share capital. It includes writing of lost capital, refunding surplus paid up share capital, and reducing liability of the members for uncalled capital. In this way, these three ways we have to understand. A capital has to complete certain legal formalities. Try to understand. A company has to complete certain legal formalities before the reduction of share capital. It requires special resolution of the general body and permission from the court. Try to understand. In this way, this is the second form. What is it? Reduction of share capital, and that is the second form of the internal restructuring. Next, surrender of share capital. Surrender of shares also. A company may surrender its share under the restructuring of share capital. This is also a very convenient form of the restructuring. The surrender of shares amount to cancellation of shares. Try to understand. Surrender of shares means amount to cancellation of shares. Generally, a part of shareholding is surrendered. Not a full shares are surrendered. It includes surrender of some part of shareholding for immediate cancellation and surrender of some part of shareholding of some the creditors of the company against their claims. Of course, a company has to complete necessary legal formalities for this kind of restructuring. Try to understand. This is the third form of internal restructuring. Now, next form we have to understand divestiture. Divestiture. What is the meaning of divestiture? We have to understand. Under this form of the internal restructuring, a company sell all or substantially all the assets of the company or sells its whole business. Try to understand. Assets, all the assets, or sell the whole of the business or division for cash. All assets including fixed assets, current assets, WIP means work in progress, and even investments are also sold as a lump sum against cash. The consolidation or the consideration is determined in lump sum to be paid in cash to the transferor company, not in any case against equity shares. Try to understand. Sometimes the specific current liabilities such as the sundry creditors, outstanding expenses, and advances received from the customers, etc., may be taken over by the transferee company. But generally, the secured and non-secured loans are not taken. Try to understand. Secured and non-secured loans are not taken over by the transferee company. The objective of all divestiture is to mobilize resources for core business which improves the valuation of the company in the stock market. That is the main objective of the divestiture. What is it? To mobilize resources for core business which improves the valuation of the company in the stock market. In this way, this is the fourth internal form of restructuring. Now, next form we have to study here, demergers. Demergers means what? What is the exact meaning of demergers? Demergers means transfer of one of the division of the company to the another company. One of the division you can transfer to the another company or two more companies. The transferee company may be existing company or newly floated company. Try to understand. The transferor company may opt any course of demergers. Any course of such type of demergers also that company can accept, that company can opt. Under demerger, the consideration is paid in the form of share. Try to understand, not in the form of cash. The shareholders of the transferee company gets the shares of the transferor company. Try to understand. The shareholders of the transferee company gets the shares of the transferor company. In another word, try to understand, demergers means splitting of the business or splitting of the company. Try to understand. Splitting of the business or splitting of the company. It requires pre-sanctions of the shareholders. Don't forget it all, because shareholders are real owner of the transferor company. It also requires the pre-sanctions of SEBI and High Court also. Try to understand. In this way, demerger is also another internal form. Okay. Then next form is also we have to study here, carve out. Carve out is internal form of restructuring under which a company transfer its one or more business division to its 100% subsidiary. How it can be transferred? 100% subsidiary. Under this restructuring, certain assets, liabilities, and loans are also transferred. Don't forget, certain assets, liabilities, and loans are also transferred under carve out situation. The subsidiary company issues shares against consideration to the transferor company and not out to its shareholders. It is also some kind of demergers, but in between the holding company and subsidiary company. The object of carve out is also to utilize additional funds for core business. It requires sanction of the shareholders, SEBI and court also. In this way, this is also another internal form of the restructuring. Next internal form we have to study, what is it? Buyback of shareholders. Buyback. What is the exact meaning of buyback? Buyback of its own shares is also termed as restructuring of company. Under this form, a company declares its scheme of buyback of its shares. The buyback price of the share is determined by the company itself, which is declared in the buyback document. Try to understand. That price is also determined by the company, and that is declared in the buyback document. The opening date and closing date of the buyback scheme is declared in the national and regional newspapers with all necessary details. The objectives of this kind of restructuring is, what is the objective? To reduce capital base of the company. What is the main object behind it? To reduce the capital base of the company. The hidden objective of the buyback of the share may be to increase the stake of the promoters for voting purpose. That is main object, try to understand. When a company has excess cash which remains idle, the buyback of shares may be preferred to return excess cash to the shareholders. That's why this is also the best alternative. This is also the best internal form of the restructuring. Then next internal form we have to study, that is delisting of shares. That is the last form of the internal restructuring. What is it? Delisting of the shares. It is very minor form of the corporate restructuring. Delisting is very minor form of corporate restructuring. Listing of shares means enrolling the shares of the company on any stock exchange recognized by SEBI. It is indirectly offering the shares of the company for free trading on stock exchange. It is optional, that is not a compulsory, that is not a mandatory. Okay, of course, listing is more advantageous for the shareholders. Listing is more advantageous for the shareholders, investors and even for the company also. The delisting of share is preferred due to certain reasons which are best known to the top management of the company and are not disclosed generally. It means that such type of reasons are not disclosed by the company. Such type of reasons may be known to the top management of the company only. Certainly, delisting has also some advantages which a company needs to encash under specific situation. But this is least preferred and very rare form of the restructuring. Okay, in this way, delisting of the shares, that is also another internal forms of the restructuring. How many forms we have studied in the internal? There are 8 types of the forms we have studied. First, alteration of share capital. Second, reduction of share capital. Third, surrender of shares. Third, divestiture. Next, demergers. Next, carve out. Next, buyback of shares. And the last, delisting of shares. These are the internal forms of the corporate restructuring. Now we have to study the external forms of corporate restructuring. How many forms are there? We have to study. What are the forms of external? Those are also we have to study. The external forms of the corporate restructuring. Try to understand. The external forms of corporate restructuring we have to study. And those external forms also we have to study in detail. First form is given there in this chart, that is acquisitions. What is it? Acquisition. The company may acquire or take over the business of other existing company is termed as acquisition. Whatever may be other existing company is there, that other existing company's business you can take it. You can take. That is called acquisition. Try to understand. A company which acquires the business of other company is known as a purchasing or vending company. What is known as purchasing company or vending company? A company which is acquired, a company which is acquired is known as a vendor company. A scheme of acquisition is worked out with the purchase consideration. Such type of acquisition is definitely there, but scheme of purchase consideration is also calculated, is also worked out, okay, with the purchase consideration. It is takeover. It is takeover on agreed conditions. It is takeover on agreed conditions with the consent of both the companies. Try to understand. With the consent of both the companies. And this is also the very important external form of restructuring. Then second form also we have to study here. What is it? Second form we have to study. What is it? Amalgamation. Amalgamation. क्या बात है? It is a combination of two or more companies. Try to understand. It is a combination of two or more companies and forming a new company. After making combination, that company can form newly, and that newly formed company is called amalgamated company. It means that all the existing and amalgamating companies get wound up officially, and all these companies decide to form a new company. Business of all amalgamated companies is taken over by the new company on agreed terms and condition. That is called amalgamation. Then third external form we have to understand. What is it? Absorption. क्या बात है? Absorption. What is the exact meaning of absorption? Absorption means what? It is absorbing the business of the other company. It is absorbing the business of other company into another company. It is a voluntary process in which the former company ceases to exist. The former company ceases to exist and get absorbed in later company. Generally, a small company gets absorbed in big company. For what purpose? For survival purpose. Of course, one or more companies may absorb their business into another company which is already in existence. That is called absorption. Next, joint venture. What do you mean by joint venture? Nowadays, joint venture is the most popular form of the corporate restructuring under the LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization. It is the partnership in corporate structure. It is the partnership in corporate sector. It is the partnership in the corporate field, sharing the capital and advanced technology, especially from foreign partners. It is an agreement between two or more companies. Try to understand. It is an agreement between two or more companies which undertakes joint venture if required. A new, what do you mean? A new company may be formed for the joint venture. New company may be formed for the joint venture. Of course, it depends upon the terms and conditions under the agreement of joint venture. In this way, these are the half dozen forms of the external restructuring. Okay, it means that these are called external forms of restructuring. What are those? First, acquisition. Second, amalgamation. Third, absorption. Next, takeover. Next, mergers. And the last, joint ventures. These are the forms of the corporate restructuring, and those are classified under external forms of restructuring. Try to understand. In this way, both types of the forms we have studied. Internal forms of restructuring also we have studied, and external forms of the restructuring also we have studied here. In this way, the restructuring, this unit we have completed here. If any difficulty will be there, I have mentioned here, I have given my email ID. You can meet at that place to me. Okay, if any type of doubt will be there, any type of shanka will be there in your mind, any type of question will be there, definitely you can ask me. I will try to solve it. Okay, thank you very much.